Sir, the enemy are at the gates. Please share with us your plan to defend us. Oh, I think I'll just bore them to death. Welcome back, builders. This week we're going to be taking a look at Marverni, the Time of Druids. This is a cool nation. It's one of the nations that I would say is maybe not the strongest communion nation, but they're pretty straightforward in their communions. They have good access to several different types of magic, and they have pretty decent troops. And if you're into sacred summons, they can do that too. So you have quite a few different options on them. Let's start by taking a look at the description of the nation. Marverni is a nation of tribal chieftains guided by druids and religious magistrates. The tribes have a long history of war and infighting, but recent developments have joined the tribes in pursuit of a single goal. The most prominent tribes are the Marverni, the Ababates, the Aponi, and the Cartnoots. The Sequani, though small tribe, are influential due to the large number of druids among them. The Smiths of Marverni tribe are reputedly the inventors of chainmail, and most nobles of the tribe use it. Low-born warriors fight bare-chested. Both wear tattoos with dormant magical powers. The Ababates are known for their martial skills. Aponi nobles fight on horseback and are the only cavalry available to the nation. The Carnoots tribe guards the sacred forest of Carnoot, where the druids gather every year. The Carnoot warriors are able to go berserk when wounded. Boars are a sacred symbol to the Marverni nation. So this is a nation made up of humans. Their troops range from very light, but put a feather in that because we're going to come back to that, to medium infantry and medium cavalry. Their magic is earth, astral, nature, and some water. They have medium priests. They go up to Holy 2. But because we can communion, we can go higher if we so choose. We also can do blood sacrifices at temples to raise our domain, although we are not blood hunters ourselves. For buildings, we get the standard forts for the era, but our temples are 300 gold, so we get half-price temples. This is a nation that has rather specific but good magic. We have good troops with quite a few varieties that we can choose from. We have a viable cavalry option, and we have an okay sacred. Let's go ahead and take a look at our units to start with. So several of these are going to be very similar to each other. Starting out, we have a slinger, standard human chassis, just the normal 10 precision, sling, normal human strength. Nothing super amazing here, although of note, this will be the same for all Marverni troops. They have a magic tattoo. The magic tattoos, depending on which type of animal they're dedicated to, do different things. So, for example, this one has a bear tattoo. It will give us limited invulnerability and strength. Limited invulnerability will always be 10 invulnerability, so that's the equivalent of protection. So if we awaken his tattoos, he will have 10 protection. That's actually super good. That doesn't add any encumbrance to our unit, and depending on the tattoo, you also get some other stats. So this one said we get extra strength, so that can up our range damage and our ranged range. So very good, and you need to look at all these units in the context of having their tattoos on. Next up, we have the Javelineer and the Bare-Chested Warrior. Similar units. So this one has, again, just human stats. They have javelins, 10 precision, and a spear and shield. No other armor. They get the bear tattoo, the same as the slinger. The Bare-Chested Warrior, again, bear tattoo, similar stats, although he has slightly higher defense. Yeah, 1 point higher defense, and he's actually wearing an iron cap. Both of these units are very viable, and doubly so once you throw up invulnerability, because that's going to bump this protection up to 10, and our head much higher, because we'll have the 16 head protection. It's not a simple addition, so he won't have 26, but it will be much higher than what we're currently seeing on here once we awaken that tattoo. For expansion, I have found that bare-chested warriors or even the Javelineers are very viable. They're just so dirt cheap, and having a javelin to get a few kills on the run-in, plus a shield to keep you somewhat alive from archery, both of these can definitely expand, and they're so darn cheap. With 8 gold, 5 resources, 5 recruitment, you can just swarm people with numbers. We also have, I'm going to skip ahead here, the Marverni Hornblower. Much more expensive than what we were just looking at, and he only has a dagger, but he has the ability of being a standard bearer. Standard bearers give their standard value as a bonus morale to the unit that they're a part of. So if we add this to a squad of bare-chested warriors, they would all get +1 morale as long as he's alive. Having multiple standard bearers in a unit do not stack, but generally speaking, the standard bearers are either lightly armored or they don't have good weapons. They tend to get killed when they get into combat, so you generally want more than just one because they will run out ahead sometimes. Like he's got combat 9, speed 9, so in this case he's a little bit slower, so he probably won't be in the front. That's a good thing. But having a couple of these mixed in really helps, and that makes our bare-chested warriors with only 9 morale actually have 10, which is pretty valuable if you're trying to swarm somebody. Next up, we have several relatively similar units here. So we have another bare-chested one. This time, we're with the broadsword instead of the spear. Notable for having 12 attack and 15 defense. This is actually a pretty decent unit, especially once you start awakening tattoos on him. He has a wolf tattoo. This one adds extra attack skill to our unit in addition to the 10 invulnerability. Very nice. So I believe that's a +1, so he would have 13 attack. So for a troop that's 10, 8, 9 for his cost, having 13 attack with a slashing 16 damage is pretty darn good. So this is kind of your budget option. Next up, we would have the Noble Warrior. So now we've got Chainmail on him. So 13 protection before he is buffed. Once he gets buffed, he's going to be in the range of like 16, 17-ish. Very respectable. Very respectable for not that expensive of a troop. Now, we have moved up in resource cost to the point where if you're going heavy sloth, maybe these guys are a little out of your reach. So you would have to stick with some of those more lightly armored troops. But if you can afford these guys, totally worth it. His big brother is the Ambibate Noble Warrior, notable for having 13 attack without his tattoo, and he has a wolf tattoo too, so he's actually going to get 2 extra attack skill, I believe. So he would have a 15 attack. Very, very good. Still have the invulnerability, just like the previous ones, and 17 damage on his broadsword. So noticing the better stats again, much more highly trained. Quite a good unit, but again, we've moved up in price quite a lot. Like you could have 2 or 3 of those cheaper guys for the cost of one of these. So you have to think about what you're going to be fighting and whether it's more effective to have 3 of the other guys or one of these. Also of note, these guys have morale 11, so if we add our standards in here, that would be 12. So a lot higher morale than those other ones would afford you. We also have a variation of the Carnute Bare-Chested Warrior. Very similar to the other ones, except he has an axe. So only 10 attack, but he's up to 19 damage at this point. Pretty darn good. He has forest survival, if that's relevant to you. He can go berserk. Note that being at 12 HP, your chances of getting hit, living, and not being like totally crippled by some affliction is kind of low, but on the chance that maybe you take a light arrow damage or something and go berserk, it's quite nice. Having an extra 2 strength and 2 attack and 2 protection for essentially quote-unquote free, not too bad. Remember also that you have a tattoo. So he has a boar tattoo. The boar tattoo gives extra invulnerability. So I believe this one is going to give him 12. The protection you gain from this is not going to stack with that. That would stack with this 3 protection he gets from the armor he's wearing. Still, pretty darn good. You still have the extra attack, still have the extra strength on your hits. Could be good if axes are your thing. You need to hit something for high damage and they're not too hard to hit. Well, let's take a second look at the Hornblower. Of note here, he is a little bit slower, so he will probably not be in the front. But that being said, you're going to want several of these in basically any group that you're going to make, just because standards are so good, and for a relatively low cost, not retreating, not losing your first battle of every single stream, definitely worth 20 gold to me. Next up, we have the Oponi Knight. This is a pretty decent cavalry unit. Definitely not the best in the world or anything, but serviceable. They have Skilled Rider 1. They have javelins, so you could do some throwing before you run in there. Note, these are not lance cavalry, so you're not going to get a charge bonus or anything. They just use a broadsword. That being said, having 12 attack on a 17 damage weapon with pretty good defense. These guys are melee cav. They will do fine. Also, they have the magic horse tattoo, which increases their defense and speed. Unfortunately, their horses do not have that, and I believe that's the same for everybody who has tattoos. None of their mounts got the tattoo. Before they were separated between rider and mount, and you just had one unified stat block, you would have got the bonus. As it is, I don't believe their speed bonus does anything, because it's going to be this speed here, not the speed of your mount for moving around. We can test that a little better maybe, but I'm not sure on that one. That being said, though, still having the extra defense would be nice for them, and having the extra invulnerability. So that 13 is actually going to be quite a decent bit higher. Note, these are getting much more expensive, though. You're looking at 3 bare-chested warriors-ish for the price of one of these. So you have to use your cavalry where it's going to be effective, and I don't think this is a no-brainer recruit. The horse they're riding has leather barding, no head protection of note on that, so you're going to have all the problems that light cav type cavalry have. You're going to have it here. That being said, though, still very fast because he's very lightly armored. Good map move if you need to have a mobile raid force or some mobile reinforcements. You can run these guys around pretty quickly. For our recruitable sacred, we have the boar warrior. These guys are pretty decent. They have boar tattoo 5, so you're looking at invulnerability 15. You're going to have a pretty dang high protection here. They have bodyguard, so if you need bodyguards for your druid, these guys have the bonuses for that. Forest survival, of course, and berserker 4. So with berserker 4, you're looking at 16 strength and 16 attack. Very nice. Now the downsides here, he is one of the like barbarian human type chassis, so a little, I mean, 4 HP is 4 HP, right? Above a normal human 10, but he's still human. Only having 14 HP, you're going to have to take a hit, survive it, not be crippled to really get much out of your berserker. But if you do, 16 strength is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, 24 damage on an axe hit with a 16 attack is very nice, but they don't have multiple attacks, so your attack density is never going to be particularly great. At size 3, you can fit 3 of these guys in a square. If you go larger, you're down to just 2, so something to consider there. Good protection for our forces, at least. I would definitely call these guys like solid medium infantry, by the way I would count it. By game turns, this is practically a heavy, since it's above 10 in an early age. Usable, I would probably not center a bless around these guys. We'll look at some summonable units in a minute. That would probably be what I will bless for. Or you would want to do some sort of caster bless, because these guys are just, they're fine, lowercase f fine. Just like we saw on Baratos with their sacreds, kind of in a similar situation, although they may actually even be a little better, frankly, because the Colossi is a better chassis than a human. Moving up to commanders, we have a scout, pretty darn standard here. He is stealthy 50, and he does have a bear tattoo if for some reason he's in combat and happens to get buffed. It's there. No shield or anything. As for our leadership options, we have a chieftain. He is inspirational, and he does have a tattoo, but he cannot put people in formations. I don't like this guy particularly because of that. You have an ambibate chieftain. Same problem. Again, inspirational, has a wolf tattoo, but cannot put people into formations. We have the Cartnute chieftain. Same thing, inspirational, boar tattoo, and a high one, so he would have pretty high protection. He does have berserk, but again, still cannot put people in formations, unfortunately. That brings us up to the Epony chieftain. Finally, we have 100th leadership, so we can get into formation. We're still inspirational, and that's pretty good because we kind of want to use those bare-chested warriors who have pretty low morale. So between inspirational and a standard, we're now looking at 11 or 12-ish morale. Much, much better than 9. He is a skilled rider too, so pretty decent defense and whatnot. The problem with this guy is if you don't have any other cavalry, if the enemy archers happen to be on fire at enemy cav, they're going to target this guy. And his horse is the same as the other ones. Nothing super special about it, so he'll probably die to arrows if you're getting focus fired. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's a little scary. having your leadership be something that the enemy can specifically target. A few other nations have issues with that, like undead who are mindless, but their leaders are not. Sometimes you could get targeted by certain spells, and you're basically guaranteed to hit the leadership. So you need to think about how you're going to add some more targets for the AI to attack. So this guy's in kind of a similar situation. That being said, Protection 13 is good. He is mounted, so he can lead around our mounted troops and use the quick map move. And he gets us into formations, so you're going to want to be using him. Starting up next, we have various sacred or mage things. Let's take a look at our boar lord. This is our sacred leader, similar to our sacred recruitable troop. He's got a boar tattoo 6, so he's looking at 16 invulnerability when he gets buffed. It should be noted, since I did not mention this earlier, invulnerability as a stat is negated by magic weapons. So just keep that in mind if you're counting on invulnerability. If you're fighting a nation with ubiquitous magic weapons, that's not going to do as much as maybe you're thinking it's going to do. But against people who are just using mundane troops, it's very effective, and it makes your cheap troops very good, very cost effective. He is sacred, but not a priest, so if you had him for some reason to lead around sacreds, he could not bless himself nor his troops, so something to keep in mind there. He is Berserk 5, which is very high for Berserk, so up to 18 strength, up to 18 attack. Could be pretty good, but unfortunately, human chassis, so not probably going to want to be thugging or anything on this guy. Going back into our priests and mages, we have the Vergobert. Old guy, he is just a priest level 1. Maybe you get these guys to bless your sacred. Since we don't have a holy 3, we're going to need decent coverage, but he's old, he's not a mage, not impressive. Not impressive. We have the Sequani Stargazer, much better. So Astral Magic 1, so that's already pretty good. That means magic duels. That's a very effective spell. If you're fighting expensive things with low astral, or even a god with low astral, you could try to snipe them out with magic duels. 7 research ability. They're not sacred, but they still only cost 52 gold a year. And they have Fortune Teller 5. Fortune Teller helps prevent bad events in the province that they are in. So if you're stacking these guys up in a research center, you'll have quite a few chances to have that proc and avoid bad things happening. Overall, this is going to be a researcher for you, and they could communion up themselves or support a communion, depending on what you're trying to do. So very usable, something you want to think about. Next up, we have the Gutier. Not sure how to pronounce that. It's probably supposed to be Germanic. This is an interesting guy, partially because to cast Awaken Tattoos, which we will look at when we get to spells, you require Nature and Priest. So this is the guy that can do it for you. So these are going to be very, very valuable. And you're going to need a lot of these guys, because Awaken Tattoos is about like a Bless spell. You can only get so many off before your troops run away. So you're going to need a lot of these guys. Having Nature 1 gives them a few spells that they can throw out. Web, Vine Arrow, Tangle Vines, some light nature stuff. Probably not going to try to do anything bigger because we have better mages to do that. But because he can do magic tattoos, he's going to be very valuable for us. He has Forest Survival, and he does have a supply bonus, so that's something at least. 9 research, he does get a random, so you could get Water, Earth, Astral, or Nature, all of which have various different spells that could be good for them. But again, you're probably going to have them be spamming out Awaken Tattoos before you're thinking about anything else that they could possibly do. They are 76 gold a year, so not quite as efficient as the Stargazers. But again, you're going to need a ton of these guys. So you're probably going to have several of them sitting around researching while they're waiting to move out with an army. So not the worst thing in the world for research, at least. Notable for having no armor again. These are very lightly armored mages, or unarmored as it is. So maybe a personal bark skin wouldn't be horrible for them, or some other buff just to keep them safe. Note that none of these mages so far have had tattoos. Next up, we have the Druid. This is our Recruit Anywhere combat mage. 1 Astral, 1 Earth, with a random of Water, Earth, Astral, Nature. So quite a decent spread there. He is a priest. Again, 11 research, but 96 gold per year because of those pathing. Same thing as previous. He's going to need to sit around and do some research while he's waiting to move out with armies. It's not the worst thing in the world, but not the most efficient. You want these guys because you're probably going to want them to communion into your Elder Druids. Our Elder Druids, as the name suggests, are old, but they're only just old. So there's something to be said about taking an Unaging Bless, which I believe would bring these guys down below their old age, and we would get rid of this humongous penalty that being old gives you. This is pretty bad stuff. And this increases as they get older. That being said, they are a priest level 2, so they can do sermons of courage. They can get into communion, so you can easily get them up to a holy 3 and get your troops blessed. If you're just looking at that, even 2 stargazers in a communion with him would bump him up to holy 3, and that would be quite good. The danger with that is they only have astral, so if he starts flinging any of his other spells, again, same random spells that we've been looking at, water, earth, astral, nature, and he gets 2 rolls of that and a 10%. So these are not linked. If you roll nature, you don't have to get 2 nature. You could get a nature and an earth or etc. So he can easily burn out your communion slaves. That's why having the druids in there might be better. You can try to use more earth magic, which you know they have, or tailor who's in the communion to match pathing. That being said, because we have the ability to get nature 2s into communion, you can give yourself personal regen, and any personal spells that you buff yourself with go down to your communion slaves. So all of your communion slaves will be regening, and that can be important if your communion has fatigued them out and they're actually taking HP damage from the fatigue. They'll heal and they'll get some fatigue back by doing that, and they'll keep you alive. Another bless that I think is quite good on this nation for that reason is large, because our druids are sacred, and if you're using them in heavy communions, having some extra HP with that regen running is just a little bit of a safety net, so you don't blow out all of your lower communions. Notably, remember, the Stargazer is not sacred, so if you're communing your high druids in with them, they are not going to be able to get the larger. With this guy, we have some interesting spells that are good in communion. We'll talk about them in the spell level, but we also just have standard stuff that's good, so we can get lots of buffs basically from these, and a little bit of offensive magic here too. Overall, pretty good unit. You're not probably going to have a ton of these. These are cap onlys. They're expensive. I mean, 480 gold for this is pricey, especially with the old age. 192 gold a year. You could have 4 Stargazers for that price researching for you. So if you're getting these guys, you need to be out and doing something with them, not just sitting around researching. This is a combat mage. He wants to be out and doing work. Who to prophesize? That's a hard one on this nation. We don't have a particularly standout chassis that was like, oh, that's going to be survivable, or it flies, or does something else specific. You could go on like an Elder Druid because it would get rid of his upkeep, but he's already old, so I mean, you might just get a disease and die, even if you don't get killed in combat, as I usually do. You could put him on like a Boar Lord, but like if your prophet goes berserk and into melee, that's pretty dangerous. You could do it on a pony chieftain. He is your highest map move unit, and he does have decent leadership, so that's something. This is probably what I would want to put that on. That being said, maybe like one of your chieftains down here. They're just so fragile. So not a nation that has like a standout chassis. We can communion up to holy 3s, so it's not the end of the world if we don't have our prophet around, but we have no recruitable holy 3s or summonable holy 3s, so only our god and our prophet can claim thrones for us. So that's something to keep in mind. That may be a bonus point for the extra map move of an Epony chieftain. So I think there's room to pick here. I don't think the Elder is a good choice. If you're going to go that route, maybe a Druid. I mean, they are still 96 gold, but he's unarmored, so you're probably going to want armor on him. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of prophetizing their mages. It's probably going to be somebody martial. Maybe even just a scout, and you do the scout prophet thing. As for national items, we have none. As for national spells, we have a few. We have the Great Boar of Cartanu, I'm going to come back to him and cover him last. We have great bears. These are just standard bears that everyone else can get, basically. They are cheap chaff, I suppose, if you wanted to summon something. They're undisciplined in animals, though. 5 magic resist. Their morale is decent, at least. I wish they berserked. That would really help these guys out. You're probably not going to want to cast that, though, because that would be using up nature gems, and we have other options that are much juicier looking. So we have the Great Boar. This is the summonable sacred that would make up the bulk of my army if I was going to go that route. They are undisciplined, they are animals, they do have trample, and they're sacred. So they're size 4. Large takes us up to 5, but that still means we can fit 2 of them per square, and we could trample anyone size 4 or lower. They have a gore attack it's kind of mediocre, not the best thing. 11 attack's not miserable, 15 damage isn't terrible. They have a decent attack skill at 12, bad-ish defense though, and only mediocre protection. So if you're going to tailor bless for these guys, I would strongly consider larger, just to make sure you have more things to trample. And part of the trample damage calculation is the size difference. So the bigger you are, the better. So if we're trampling human-sized people, being a 5 is better than a 4 on size. Very low encumbrance. Note that they are tramplers, though, so if they do decide to retreat, they will go straight through your own troops. Something to keep in mind. We also have the Iron Boar here. These guys are interesting in that they're very, very similar to the other one, except for these ones have been turned into steel for some reason, and they have 20 protection. 20 protection is very, super heavy infantry levels. Again, very low defense skill, but same attack, same trample, same encumbrance. Could be good if you just need to dump gems. These guys would be fine. They can take your bless. But this is the one I would really consider. The Great Boar of Cartanu. These guys, while similar to your other ones, they're much larger. They're size 8. They have trample. They're also fortune teller 15, so quite high. So that's like a 15% chance to negate a bad event happening wherever they're at. They are sacred, so they could get your bless. So if you do decide to go with a enlarged bless, they'd be up to size 9. Very respectable. But the key thing for them is they are a domain monster summoner. That means that while in our domain, we'll always summon at least 1 boar per month while in friendly domain. So a strong strategy would be summon up a bunch of these and have them just generate free troops for you every single round. No gold upkeep cost, no gem upkeep or something like that. So every one of these guys you summon is an investment, and the interest is more and more of these great boars. So while you do have a spell that can get quite a few of these in one go, I feel like the better investment, if you can wait, is to get these guys and just generate tons and tons and tons of free boars. Depending on what bless you take, that can just be a nightmare. If you took something like Blood Vengeance, and even just nothing else, every time they're hitting your boars, and they have 20 HP, so they're probably getting hit a couple times. They have to make a magic save or take some of that damage back, reflected back at them. It could be quite powerful. We also have one more spell. We can do the Summon Monster Boar. That is the ranged ritual attack that gives a Providence an event that there's a big boar causing trouble. It will raise unrest, and I think it can kill population until they go and they patrol it out. Generally speaking, I'm not a huge fan of that spell, but sometimes causing trouble and making people, have to go deal with that might be useful. That being said, we have better uses for nature gems. The great boars are just ridiculously good there. As for heroes, we have 3. We have the Wanderer. Nothing super duper special. He is much higher in nature than we normally would have, but we can communion nature, so that's kind of whatever. Of note on him, though, having 4 nature just right off the bat means that with a Thistle Mace, he could cast Mother Oak, and he could be your Mother Oak guy. His other things that he has here, I know he has a Thistle Mace, but I don't believe this one gives you the +1 nature, so you would still need to get him one. He is a decent researcher. He has Animal Awe, but I don't know why you would have him in melee with animals. He's poison resistant. forest survival, good supply bonus, and he is a Beastmaster, so maybe he leads your boars around, gives them that extra +1 morale. I don't know, could be a thing. I think I would keep him, though, back and for doing rituals of some sort, whether it's summoning or Mother Oak or other things. He is pretty high in other things here, too. Boots get him up to 3 Earth, which means he could help craft your hammers and boots and whatnot. He does have strong Astral and Earth is a good cross path for crafting. Very good there. Next up, we have the Antlered one. Kind of an interesting dude. He's like an elk-headed dude. Has a great sword that is magic. That's pretty interesting. He's a great sword that has a golden shield. So strong there. 23 HP, though. I mean, I would consider this guy just a strong army leader. He has stealth, he has berserk, he does have tattoos. I don't think you want to thug with him or anything, though. He's pretty unique. And he is your best leader with inspirational, so that's something. So, cool guy, you know. It's hard to really recommend these, like, human-sized melee heroes that don't cast magic, because they just die. So, that's unfortunate. And we have Blinded. Again, just another strong mage. He is blind, he is old. 4 Astrals, really high. So if you could boost that just 1, you could do something like Eyes of God or other Astral level rituals. I would probably save him for that. Otherwise, he's a free 21 research mage that you could use. So, okay heroes. I think Wander and Blind are interesting in that they're close to being able to cast globals if you can't do that on your god. Okay, so let's bring it together here. I think this is an interesting nation. You could go like Turmoil with some fortune and some magic and try to go lean into like your magic and your gems using your bare-chested warriors who are very, very cheap. This guy, I think, being the better of them for the cheaper side at only 8 resources, but you could even go cheaper than that. You could go down to bare-chested warrior for 9, or even cheaper with the Javelineer for 5. Several options for very, very low resource troops, or even you could go production and you could go with the higher end stuff. Like, this is a very solid troop. Having that extra attack skill, so a 15 attack, we're going to have 3 per square, decent protection, and it'll be great once we have Awakened Tattoos. This is a very, very solid line infantry. Very solid. Like, not what you'd probably expect from, like, a barbarian, like, tribe-type people. So, a very good troop here. So we have some options there. We have some standard stuff. We have a usable Sacred. We have decent cavalry. Slingers are nothing to write home about, but we could give them poison. Poison is not particularly great, though, because you have to actually deal damage through their armor to get the poison check. But it's a thing. Maybe you just need that. We don't have access to fire natively. We don't have access to air natively, so we would struggle with those. We do have decent earth, and the earth can get to communions, so we could do some more buffs to these slingers. You could get them up to something usable. Let's take a peek at spells here. Of note, particularly on these guys, we already peeked at it once, but if you're in an emergency, at 3 we get the Sounder of Boars, and that gets us 20 of those Sacred Boars for 15 gems. Decent. But if you can hold out until you get to 5, the Contact Boar of Carnut is so good. For 7 gems, you essentially get 1 boar per turn for the rest of the game. I don't think you can get more than 1, even in high domain. I could be off on that. It's kind of hard to tell. Once you get rolling, you just have so many guys summoning. It's hard to tell who's getting which ones, but it's good. It's very good. With our communions, though, we can do a spell that not tons of people can do, but is very good. Gifts from Heaven at Evo 5. 3 Earth and 1 Astral. So you're going to need to be in communions to do this. It is expensive also. So this is where you might blow out your communions if you're not using Druids to support it, because they'll have their own Earth magic, and the Summon Earth power would help raise that too. This is a range 100, fast casting, area of effect 1, number of effects 3. So we get 3 essentially meteors that land on the battlefield. It's low precision, so if they're throwing this into your front line, it's going to be a clincher every single time they cast. But we have very cheap frontline units. If I have Javelineers or bare-chested warriors out front, and I'm killing something more expensive than them with these, and I'm generally killing as many of the enemy as I am of myself, I'm probably pretty happy with that. It is 50 fatigue, though, so you're going to want enough of a communion to get yourself above 3 earth handily, so that you can lower this fatigue cost a decent amount. That being said, it deals 150 damage. There's very few things in this game that could take 150 damage, and even once. And the ones that can, ain't taking it twice. Very, very high damage. This is essentially delete a square that you hit. And you can cast it every single round if you can afford it. And you get three shots per try. Can't do it in caves, so that's a distinct weakness in Dominion 6. So remember that if you're having to go underground, that you're not going to be able to be doing this. We also can't do it underwater. It leaves behind fire where they land. The fire is area of effect 8, so that's a pretty good size. And it does 10 magic fire damage that's armor piercing. So even if you don't get direct hits, you might just boil everyone near the landing site. So very, very strong spell. And we can just pour that out. Even if you don't have Elder Druids, in communions, our normal Druids could do that. Now, you'd have to go pretty high. Like, with 2 communion slaves, that would take us to Earth 2. Earth power would take us to Earth 3. But we would fatigue out pretty quickly. So you would probably want 4 or 8 slaves in that communion to boost this high enough to make that usable. But once you do, very, very strong. Also, we have a stronger version of that, Meteor Shower. This one is a battlefield-wide spell. This is like a you cast it and get out of there type spell. Maybe you bring in a couple chaff things you don't care about, you get this cast, and then you cast Returning and just get out. And you let the enemy sit on a battlefield that's being just absolutely poured over by meteors, especially if it's like their Doom Stack or something, or maybe even like a Heavy Throne. Go in there with this first, try to lighten it out, and then come in with your real army next turn. Very, very powerful there. And even if you can't use the Gift from Heaven in combat, you have lots of other things. So you could Earthquake, although note your human troops that are unarmored are pretty vulnerable to that too. And we don't have an easy way of levitating or anything like that to protect ourselves. But it is an option. You'll probably have guys that start resorting to doing Blade Wind. They love that spell for some reason. With damage 14, if you're using your heavier troops in the front and they are Awakened Tattooed, they're not super duper vulnerable to it, but you're going to have a lot of friendly fire, I find, with that spell. Also, in Enchant, at level 3, we get our Awakened Tattoos. Now, unfortunately, we do not have a larger version. I really wish they had a second level and maybe even a battlefield-wide one, because it's a lot of micro. It's range 20 plus, it's area of effect 5, but 5 squares is not huge when you need to do a ton of boars or even a ton of just your normal sacreds. Like, it can be rather hard to get this off. And you want to do this to all your troops, not just your sacreds. So you're going to need an absolute ton of those Gucciators to be casting this spell just all over your line. You're going to probably script them for at least 3 of these and then probably advance forward and hope that they cast it. We kind of can't avoid getting some Nature 1 spells, so we can't force them to cast this, unfortunately. But they tend to like doing this. It's a relatively cheap fatigue. It doesn't really miss, so very, very key spell. I think no matter what, whether you're going Sloth or you're going Production or whatever, you're going to want to Awaken Tattoos on every troop you've got because they are that good. Being able to have that just essentially free 10 protection that Invulnerability gives, and then whatever bonus stats your tattoo gives you is just so good. Makes these troops so cost effective. Those are probably the biggest spells I would say there. So we have a nation that has summonable sacreds that are rather effective. We have a decent troop line that can do several different things. We have a good variety of different cost points. We have usable cavalry. We have some morale bonus stuff. We have some kind of narrow pathing, but it's good pathing. We know what we can do with it, and we're good at what we can do. We have efficient research. We can do some prevention of bad events. So maybe you could go with misfortune. Your heroes are not stupendous, so lowering your chance of getting heroes with misfortune isn't the worst thing, and you can prevent some of the bad events. That being said, if you like nations that can go turmoil, fortune, this would definitely be one of them. And even though you're not misfortune, just having more events go off means that you'll get more bad events in general. And so being able to prevent that with some of your guys is rather handy. So very cool nation. Rather straightforward, I think. Good entrance point for communions, though. It's pretty obvious what you can do in your communions, unlike something like Arcacephale or TNC, where it can be really hard to script your communions because everybody has a different set of paths. You're basically going to know what these guys are going to have when you're setting them up. I think they're pretty straightforward as far as communions go. As for gods, I think you could go multiple different ways. Like I said, you can go heavy scales, you could go turmoil scales. I do think you would want to avoid anything like death. We are kind of nature focused, and while we don't blood hunt particularly or anything, money is very good because we can spend it on expensive mages. In this game, I took a monolith because he was the cheapest option for the bless that I wanted. We went with a berserk and larger for the boars. Now, taking berserk is dangerous because we have lots of sacred mages, and if they take damage and go berserk, they're going to run into combat. But that's a risk I'm willing to take because the weakness to our summonable boars is that they're tramplers with decent morale, but not the best thing ever, that you don't want them to go get wounded and then retreat back through your army. So by making them go berserk, they're strong enough that they probably will survive to have that go off. You don't have to worry about them retreating. And with larger, they've got 26 HP. That helps their damage a little bit because their strength is going to go up. Berserk will make it go even higher. You already have bad defense, so being larger doesn't really matter. The berserk helps their protection a little bit if you don't get them buffed with anything else. I think it's a fun bless. Larger and berserk also is, while not good, it's fine on your boar warriors if you're recruiting those. The berserk does stack with their normal berserk, so you get quite crazy dudes if they survive a hit. So rather fun there. I think there's a lot of room for different things here. You could go with an awake expander on these guys for sure. Maybe even just like a region. So this is our choices for pretender gods. We can go the gambit from immobiles all the way down to mortal guys. You have lots of nature-y, trample-y things, so maybe you could try like an awake build with the Great Mother. Now, unfortunately, she's size 10, so putting larger on her doesn't help her, but she does come with regen already, so either you could stack that with extra regen, or take the larger for your other units, even though it's not going to affect her. I think there's things you could do there. She's expensive, though. That's a chassis I wish was a little less pricey. You could go with Thrice-Horned Boar. There's another Berserker Trampler. He's size 9, so that larger bless would help him there. Could be quite interesting to go with that and have an awake expander for him. You'd lose out on the Astral, but we really don't need that. He does have recuperation also, which is very helpful for awake expanders. So at a size 10 Berserking Boar, he could even just buff himself with personal regen, which, while you'd have to wait maybe a couple turns for some research to get done. Personal regen is in enchantment at level 2. So you could even luck into that if you went magic scales, or just a few turns of research to get up that. You could take a little bit of nature, get the personal regen rolling, and I think he would expand just fine. With recuperation, he would be able to heal off whatever horrible things happen to him. And then later on, he could sit back and cast big earth or nature buffs for your army, so he wouldn't be like super outclassed later on. Very good there. He could, if you took enough nature, like he could do group regen for you, or even mass regen. I think he's very good. Army regen, if you wanted to even go really high. So could be an interesting chassis there. Plenty of things viable. The bulls can be pretty interesting. If you wanted some blood, you could take the black bull, do like a regen and maybe Blood Surge or maybe Enchanted Blood and Berserk. There's things you could do there. Could be interesting. The Thrice-Horned Boar of note, his protection is only 16, so just keep that in mind. If you're not in the mid-20s, be mindful of what you're expanding into. It can get rough. So just bear that in mind if you don't take hard skin. So overall, I think Marverni is a relatively straightforward nation. It has interesting things it can do with summonable sacreds, with good pathing mages. A very, very solid nation. It does take you a little bit to get rolling. In the super early game, I feel that they're somewhat vulnerable because you don't have any big scary beatstick things, and you won't have the research to do scary magical things. Maybe rushing like thaumaturgy so that you have communions and mind burn. Then if nothing else, you could communion up and have mind burn. That could help you against an awake expander or against like giants that are attacking you. It would give you something to be threatening with. But once you get rolling and you've got some different research done, you've got some summons maybe coming in, there's lots of other things from Conjuration that you can summon with water, earth, astral, nature. Those are all paths that have tons and tons of conjurations. So you could find something useful. We also have some water, so we could get underwater with some summons or something, or rings of water breathing, etc. Lots and lots of options there. We have cheap temples, so that's something that we can do. We have lots and lots of troops. We have nature magic, so we can move large armies around that can be rather helpful. Overall, very, very cool nation. I think it's one that newer players could definitely get a handle on. Maybe this would be a good first entrance point for doing communions if you're wanting to try that out, but you're feeling overwhelmed with something like Archocephaly or TNG. This could be a good one there. For our gym income, 3 astral, 2 earth, and only 1 nature, but we can search nature pretty easily, and they're relatively common in the early age. Having the earth income is nice. Boots, hammers, armors, lots and lots of things there. And ditto with having the astral. There's lots of interesting things you can do with astral. And if nothing else, you can alchemy those into something else that you need. So I hope you enjoyed this quick look at Marverni. I think there's a lot of room here for experimentation, and I'm sure people will have things that I've missed. So please share those down in the comments below. We had a great conversation last week with Baratos and blood hunting. Check that out if you missed it. If you were a contributor to that conversation, thank you, thank you. We had a bloody good time in that stream. If you haven't checked that out, please do. As always, I've appreciated sharing all this with everyone. Remember, I'm streaming on Fridays at the moment, and you can check out that stream. If you're viewing this from the past, make sure that you check out the VOD of the stream. I'm sure it will be a good time. Boars are going to take over the world is my plan. I think it'll be fun. All right, take care, builders. I look forward to chatting with you over the week and seeing people on stream. Take care.